Hello everyone. In this lesson, we learn about one more useful conditional execution tool in R, which is called the switch function. The switch function evaluates a single expression and allows you to choose one action or value from a set of options based on that particular expression. It can actually be used in two modes. We have the character or named switch, where you would match the result of an expression against named arguments. And then we also have the numeric or positional switch, which uses a numeric index to pick the nth argument. Now, this will be explained in details when we get to R. So this is actually the syntax. It is just simply the switch function, and the very first one is the expression that you give it. So that can be a character or can be an index. The character, we know what it means, character string. An index can be any value like 1, 2, 3. So we will explain that in R. And then the ellipses simply represent the list of alternatives to choose from. So let's go to R and demonstrate how to use the switch function. First of all, let's go ahead and check the documentation for the switch function. So we would go ahead and execute this, bring up the documentation, and then we read something little about it. So here we are selecting one of a list of alternatives. And so we would see that it evaluates expression and accordingly chooses one of the further arguments. And that is the usage right there. The argument is expression and then ellipsis, which is going to be the list of alternatives. Let's see how we can actually demonstrate this. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a variable object called fruit in which we assign the character apple. Now I would like to create another object called message, and then where we would use the switch function, and then would begin to now put in the expression and the list of alternatives. So the expression is simply going to be the variable object which we have created, and that is going to be fruit. So think about it. You would see that fruit actually contains apple. So apple is going to be the expression to this very first argument of the switch function. That is what we mean by character switch. So it identifies whatever we put here as the first argument as a character like we have for apple. Now we need to give the list of alternatives. So I press enter to break it to the next line. And the list of alternatives, if we are using the character switch, then we are going to match the result of an expression. So in this case, the expression is going to be fruit, which contains apple character, against named arguments. So we need to now give them names. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and say apple equals, and then let's have the first alternative and say you chose apple. And then comma, let's have a second argument. Let's call it mango. And then we would say you chose mango. So we have these two alternatives. Now, what actually happens is very simple, is that whatever this expression is simply going to go through the list of alternatives and find its corresponding name. So this fruit is assigned the value of apple. Therefore, when it goes through the named argument, it sees this apple and hence prints this particular message, you chose apple. So let's go ahead and execute this code. First of all, let's go ahead and do the assignment. We run this. And then we go ahead and also execute this, and let's print the message. And then we see that we have you chose apple. So it's a very simple thing. This is simply a character. You know what? You could have actually done it this way in a straightforward manner. Just simply go ahead and replace this one with apple like this. So if you also go ahead and execute this part of the code, you see that that also returns the same example. So this is what we mean by character switch. Now you can go ahead and add a default in case you actually give another fruit which is not in the list of alternatives. So how do we do this? You would go ahead and write the same code, but this time, actually let's name these ones as message 1, and then let's have message 2, and let's have message 3, so we can distinguish between these codes. So what we're going to do right now is just add a default. Now the default should not be named. Just leave it like that and write your character alternative. So here we would go ahead and write something like unknown fruit like this. So this is actually going to be the default, which means that, for example, here we have fruit is apple. If I actually go ahead and change this one to mango, which is in the list of the alternatives, let's go ahead and execute this line of code. Now fruit contains the character mango. If we now print these lines of code and print the message 3, we end up getting you chose mango, because mango is found in the list of alternatives, and that is simply the very second one here. But what if I actually change this one to say banana, And if I should execute, now fruit contains banana as a character, which is not found in the list of alternatives. And so if we go ahead and execute these lines of code and print message 3, we see that that presents the default value, which happens to be unknown fruit. So simply, all that we are doing is a character named switch. So once we're using the character, you should go ahead and name your argument so that whatever the expression is given to the very first argument of the switch function, it matches whatever character that is found within the name argument and returns that particular option out of the list of alternatives. So that is just very simple. Now we would go ahead and work with a numeric or positional switch. So what I'm going to do right now is create another one called message 4, and then we have the switch function, and we're going to give it the same expression, which is fruit. But this time we do not name the argument because we are not dealing with a character switch. So all we have to do is just give the alternatives. So for example, I would go ahead and say you chose apple, then comma. The second alternative, I would say you chose mango. And then let's have a third alternative. So let's say you chose banana. Like that. So that is all that you need. We now have 3 options. Now, I am simply going to go ahead and change this expression because we are no longer dealing with a character switch. We are now dealing with a positional or numeric switch. So we wouldn't need this particular character expression. All we need is an index. So you have to supply the value of 1 to match the very first the very first value in the list of alternatives. And then if you also give the value of 2, it will also match the second one. If you give the value of 3, it matches the third one. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this one here. So switch 1 here, and if I should execute only this part without the message 4, we end up getting you chose apple. If I now change this one to the value 2, and then if I execute these lines of code, we get you chose mango. So that is going to be the second in the list of alternatives. And if I change this one to 3, then you would also have the very third alternative actually printed, which is you chose banana. But what happens if you give the value of 0 or you give any other index that is out of bounds? It simply returns null. So right now, if I run this, you would see that 0 actually doesn't return anything. And if I should also give a value like 4, it also returns nothing. That is because the default output is simply going to be null, nothing. So if you give any index that is out of bounds. So this is how we use the switch function. Let's go ahead and have one exercise to practicalize this. So we have the exercise 1, the grade message. You are asking the user to enter a letter grade, which is A, B, C, D, F, and you are using switch to print a message. And so A represents excellent, B is good job, C is fair, D is needs improvement, and F is failed. So how do we do this? First of all, because we are asking the user to enter a letter grade, remember the read line function, and then we're going to give it the prompt, and then we would say enter a letter grade, like that. So let's go ahead and save this one into an object. Let's call it grade, like this. And then we would now go ahead and use the switch function. So I am going to write message, and then I would use the switch function. And all I'm going to do is pass the expression, and that is going to be the one that the user actually gives, which is the letter grade. And then I will now give the list of alternatives, and that list of alternatives, we are now going to have these options right here. So I would say A is going to be equal to excellent. So that is going to be the first one, excellent. And then we would have B is going to be equal to good job. Then we would have C equals fair. We would have D equals needs improvement. And the very last option, let's go ahead and have it as failed. Actually, it's F rather than E, like this. So let's go ahead and use it to print a message. Now I'm going to use the cat function to print a very nice message. So let's go ahead and write your grade is, then comma, let's go ahead and now write the grade. And then we would now bring a hyphen and then the message, like that. So let's see how this actually works. So here we execute this. Let's clear the console. We execute this, enter a letter grade. So let's say A, press enter. And now we would go ahead and run this code. Now, because the A that the user entered matches the very first list of alternative, then the message is excellent. So simply your grade is A dash excellent. So let's go ahead and print this, and we see that your grade is A, excellent. So if we now go ahead and run this again, and this time, let's say we actually enter D, and then we run this part of the code, and then we print a very nice statement, your grade is D, need improvement. So this is how we use the switch function.